Mm-hmm.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Salim Badat of Living Islam. And I'm very, very honored, very pleased to have Shuaib Badat. Shuaib Badat is my nephew, my beloved brother's son, Shuaib. Welcome, Shuaib.
Jazakallah. Glad to be here.
So the reason I have Shuaib as my guest today is today I had a conversation with Shuaib and I asked Shuaib, what are some of the challenges facing our youth? And Shuaib was very concerned, being a youth as well, 25 years young. But Shuaib was very concerned, and he said, there are few things, Uncle Salim, that are turning our youth towards atheism. And and when we had this discussion, it came to my mind that this conversation we have to start this conversation, and it's very important that we do. So Shuaib, just introduce yourself, brother.
Okay, so Jazakallah for the introduction. I studied mechanical engineering in campus. I went on to do my master's in aerospace engineering. I after was very much involved in the academic world, and very much so in terms of the culture of youth and the gaming society and the sports community and that sort of thing. And I noticed there was a general trend that existed among the youth where they didn't actually believe in religious values, and there was this trajectory going toward, especially in the scientific community, towards not believing in a faith, and that a logical person actually believes in no God, and that was where I sort of started studying a bit more into the theology in general and religion in general and its roots and how people viewed it over time and generally how society rejected it or accepted it, and the religions that existed and thrived and those that crumbled. And I looked at the arguments of ancient philosophers as to whether or not there is a God. And I had to build up this arsenal of tools because I found that the world around me was continuously attacking me. It's sort of embarrassing for you to be firm on your faith, especially being a scientist. A question I get asked very often by atheists in the scientific community is that if you're a scientific person, how can you actually believe in religion? And that question to me was so illogical because, looking around me, it was an obvious situation that, there's a creator and there's a purpose to life, that everything can't just be meaningless. So I studied, I'd say for a good 3 or 4 years, the philosophy of religion. And yeah, that's my background.
Alhamdulillah. So it's self-studied, am I correct? Self-studied. So
Okay. Correct.
Okay. So okay. And it's interesting that you would look at philosophy because remember, a society is judged or a society is influenced by its philosophy, and so what I have here is a few questions or a few points of discussion, so to speak, and we'll go through one at a time, okay? And there are certain so let's talk about nihilism that is being pushed by the media to the youth. And remember, this nihilism is based on Western philosophy of existentialism, and Nietzsche being the proponent of existentialism. So if you can give us a brief background on nihilism, what is nihilism and how has it affected Western society or Western thought?
So nihilism in general is the rejection of all religious values, right? So nihilism rejects all religious values, and it pushes forward the ideology that life is meaningless, right? There's no purpose behind life. There's no purpose behind the soul. We are all just random particles just colliding in this universe, right? So that's the concept of nihilism. The way it's being pushed forward by the media is that science seems to be a backing force behind nihilism, and the way they push it forward is that we have not found any proof of God, right? And you'll see this continuously. It comes about in animated series. It comes across in modern movies in Hollywood. And the intelligent person in the room, I know many people watch the series called Big Bang Theory, And the most intelligent scientists there will be atheists, right? You'll have a cartoon like Rick and Morty, where you have this grandfather that's all knowing, all intelligent, the best scientist in the universe, and he will say there's no God, right? And you'll have always the main character, the most intelligent character, the one that you're backing, will be one that is either homosexual in nature or accepting of it, or just completely dismisses any morals that are based in religion. And there's been this continuous trend in the modern world. You can have morals, you can believe whatever you want. You know, you can believe that a man can become a woman, or you can be gender fluid, as long as your beliefs aren't based in religion. You can believe whatever you want. And there's this sort of hatred for religion being pushed onto the youth and bombarded. And you'll notice on Instagram and Twitter, if you go through the comments of any religious post, you'll probably get, for every one comment that's religious, you'll get 20 comments that's atheist, right? You'll get 20 comments on people saying, look at these idiots, why are they following religion? It's been so long, the 21st century is here and still believing in this. One of the problems with this is the religious figures are not addressing it from a logical perspective. The religious figures are saying, you must hear and you must believe, right? And that's it. They're not going into these academic discussions. The problem is the youth is seeing on one side, you have these nihilists, these atheists or agnostics, willing to go through a somewhat scientific method to prove their point. And you have a religious figure that's completely shunning the situation, completely shunning the subject, and shying away from an address, a discussion. So it's difficult for the youth to make the correct choice, right? Because they see a group of people that they believe in shying away from the topic, and another group of people bombarding them. What do they do? In a very dangerous position. And obviously, we know if you have to go into it, if you have to approach it from a logical perspective, all this nihilistic mindset is wishy-washy magic stuff. Like it's not grounded in a solid foundation of logic.
It's very interesting. So let us look at the approach of our scholars. And this is not something new. During the British occupation of India, the British were bringing in missionaries to come and convert the Muslims, but also to what is the word? To corrupt religious thought. And they brought in these missionaries. So what the religious institution, one in particular, what they did was they closed ranks. They closed ranks and said, look here, we need to sit in this fort and we need to protect ourselves from all these external influences. And we can understand the reason for that. But if you look at the pattern of history, that never, even in warfare, that never works, right? If you had to sit in a fort and wait, at the end of the day, you're going to be defeated. They're going to infiltrate you because defense is never, defense, you can only defend for so long. So in retrospect, putting our head in the sand will not let the threat will not go away if you put our head in the sand. And that is very important that our scholars to beat them, we need to understand them. We need to understand their thought process. We need to understand how they think, and then we need to beat them. Taking Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali beat the philosophers by learning philosophy. He wasn't anti-philosophy. There were certain aspects of philosophy that ran against religious thought, like metaphysics. But what Ghazali did, Ghazali learned it, dissected it, and then defended Islam. And I think,
of course,
I think this is what's needed now. Unfortunately, our scholars may not be equipped to do this. So there has to be a reboot of the educational curriculum in these institutions to equip them. Am I correct? To equip them.
Yes. So your thoughts? It's a very clannish mindset. It's very, very common in human analysis. It's called the bandwagon fallacy. So what we say is, if certain political parties, for example, let's say if you look at the politics, it's a very good example. It's either my party's view on healthcare and education versus yours, right? And what you do is, if one person says, or a single body says something you don't agree with, you cancel that entire body of data.
Right.
right? Let's say, for example, science might have within it the theory of evolution, which goes against our understanding of Genesis, right? How Adam al-Islam came. What they do is, because a body of knowledge said one thing, we don't want to know about biology, we don't want to know about mathematics, we don't want to know about physics, we don't know about astrology. We cancel everything out because of one subsect that we don't agree with. I mean, that's a problem that's happening in the Muslim side today as well. I mean, if you have these Muslims that have minor differences, we're going to create sects so quickly, right? Mine versus yours, and they separate based on these small differences, entire subsets, right? So science at its very core is knowledge, right? That's what it is. If something is scientifically accurate, it means you've done a test. If you continue doing that test, you'll get the same result. How is that in any way against religion, right? There's no paradox between those two. And yeah, it's an error of the scholars of faith to now cast themselves away from a body of knowledge that has so much benefit. I mean, what I always say is, in order for something to be permitted in religion, everyone has to be able to do it, and society should be able to function, right? I use this example for why homosexuality is banned, right? If everyone was homosexual, goes against a need of every carbon-based life form, right? Every carbon-based life form is required to reproduce for the species to exist. If everyone is homosexual, you cannot have the species sustaining itself. Likewise, if you have a society that never looks in academia, right, we'll have no medicine, no antibiotics, no gynecologists, no pilots, no drivers. You won't have anything to function. Society will crumble and collapse. And there's been great scientific breakthroughs that happened through the Western world, save the collapse of society. I mean, I had someone like Fritz Haber rather, who invented modern fertilizer. We were at a point in our society about 100 years ago where we were about to run out of food to survive, right? The human race was coming to a point where we were unable to sustain the consumption, right? We were going to come to a tipping point, and it wasn't going to be such that the era wouldn't have been society will sort of stagnate. It'll completely collapse because they were initially getting fertilizer from bird poo, right? That was the initial system. Now, Fritz Haber, a German scientist, invented ammonia in his lab. Without ammonia, the human race would have collapsed many years ago. Right now, you can't say the saving of society is now a bad thing, right? So, what position are the Islamic scholars in? If no one in the Islamic world studies academia, we are now doing a disservice to society.
I think absolutely. Those are such valid points, Shuaib. And I think the reason for this misunderstanding is because we have distanced ourselves from the spirit of the Quran. And Allah Ta'ala is constantly saying, reflect, look. So, and one of the, one of the famous hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, knowledge is the lost property of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he is most deserving of it. He is most deserving of it for wherever he finds it. And there's a hadith, even though you have to seek knowledge, you should go to China, basically. It's that another, and China was a great civilization at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So I think it's the ignorance of Quran, and Quran is, that's a topic for later on if we have time, right? And I think that is very important. And it's the separation of knowledge. We have separated knowledge between dini talim and secular separation of knowledge. The great scholars, Islamic scholars of the bygone era, great Islamic scholars, great scholars of jurisprudence, Islamic tafsir, and all of that, were scientists, were mathematicians, were all of that, were leading. I mean, the cradle of the Renaissance, the Renaissance in Europe. What spurred the Renaissance in Europe was the occupation
wouldn't have happened
in Spain.
Would not have happened without, of course,
so
it would not have happened without the Muslim scholars.
Shuaib, logic.
Correct.
So the other, I think so. A lot of these conversations that we are speaking of will overlap, right? So the next point of this. All right, sorry. One more thing about nihilism. Can I just quote something here? Umar Khayyam, Nietzsche, Berkeley, all these guys. They were proponents of nihilism, and Khayyam said this world would be meaningless without wine, sweetheart, and music. And then he says, however much I look at the incidents of this world, I came to the conclusion that the real object of life is luxury and the rest is nonsense. Now, Shuaib, they believe that the purpose of existence was only to fulfill their instant gratification of desires. Yes.
Now, the problem with that, there's so many issues with that. You see, that statement alone, a person might be led to believe, right? Because humans in our nature, we go through so much difficulty. We think that we're chasing luxury. Now, you can address this from a Islamic perspective, and you can address it from a secular perspective. And I don't see any difference between the two, right? The secular perspective will even tell you there's a quote from Freud. I'm not sure if you know Freud. He was a philosopher, and he said that the human race was given everything they needed, and they just had to eat cake the whole day. They will destroy society just to give themselves a challenge, right? Because the human dopamine cycle doesn't work like that. We don't want to be on the beach with our feet up, getting grapes into our mouth. That's nice for a minute, right? It's nice for a week. After a while, your body actually wants difficulty. It wants to conquer. It wants to strive. It wants to go through a fast, right? Imagine if you had all the money in the world, every single desire you ever wanted is there. You'll be depressed. There's no ambition. There's no aim. There's no difficulty, no challenge. Now, Islam, in its very essence, solves even this problem. It solves the problem of a person being in too much of ease, right? He still has to get up in the morning for Fajr. He still has to fast and strip himself from having food and water and physical pleasures during the day. And we have to go for Hajj and we have to read Salah. And all these systems in Islam even solve life beyond the point of surplus pleasure. So if these nihilistic philosophers said, the aim of life is pleasure, science has now proven pleasure doesn't actually give you satisfaction. It doesn't give you peace, right? What they found is that you need a constant strive, a constant effort, and then get pleasure. That's what you actually want in life. And Islam has solved something beyond the nihilistic success. Beyond the pinnacle of nihilism, we have a solution for it.
Absolutely. Nietzsche, spoke of the Superman. And the Superman is basically the one who can conquer man and the one who is strong. And there's no moral virtue and there's no morality that guides him. As long as he is strong, he can conquer everything. And Allama Iqbal refuted Nietzsche's concept of the Superman. So basically, Nietzsche speaks of the meaningless of life and self-gratification, where Iqbal says, Allama Iqbal, he says, "Oh man, you are the powerful hand and tongue of the immortal being. Create a firm faith to realize yourself, because so far you have been a victim of doubts and suspicion about your own possibilities." Okay, Shuaib, we are actually running out of time. We have 8 minutes, 8 minutes left for the 45. No. What I'd like to do is immediately after this, I want to come back on with you, if you're okay with that. Do you have another 45 minutes? We'll have 45 minutes, right?
Sure. No problem.
Okay. So, the Quran, Shuaib, I know of the references, but do you know anything offhand where Allah speaks of logic and using logic and being grounded in
definitely.
religion, or the seerah of the Prophet? So we have about 6-7 minutes. So if you can just, explain that, how important that is in the seerah of the Prophet.
No, definitely. If you look at what we are, what you and I are, Salim, we humans, right? We insan. Yeah. The Quran refers to us as Bani Adam. The story of Genesis in the Quran and the creation of Adam, if you go back to that point, and you always wonder, why is mankind the best of creation? It's an interesting question, right? Because if you look at our environment, just around us, we see creations that are more powerful than us, right? We see lions and cheetahs and whales, and there's so much of forces around us that crumble us. Even the wind and the ocean are creation of Allah Ta'ala, which will destroy us very quickly. And if you go to the Quran's mention, there's a ayah in the Quran that says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَائِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah Ta'ala told the angels, He's going to appoint someone on the earth to be a general, right? A general on the earth. He's referring to Adam alayhi salam. And the angel said, Are you going to create a creation cause mischief? And Allah Ta'ala's response was, you don't know what I know, right? It's a very important story. And then the proof behind this was Allah Ta'ala taught Adam the names of things. And when the question was posed to the angels about existence and creation, the response was purely that we only know what you've told us. And Adam was able, alayhi salam, was able to explain. Now that was the evidence behind why mankind is labeled the best of creation. Our understanding, our ability to reason, our ability to rationalize. And the Quran is flooded with these situations about, where Allah Ta'ala says, do you not think, do you not ponder, do you not reflect? All those are inclined towards mankind's nature to be conscious, to be aware, to be able to think analytically. And I think that's a part of mankind that Allah Ta'ala loves. It's definitely something that's encouraged, and definitely something that's shunned and looked down on.
Why do you think it's being shunned? But it's not shunned all over the world. It's not shunned all over the world. It's not I don't think it's shunned among scholars from a certain background, unfortunately. But why do you think it's shunned? Why do you think it's shunned? Afraid of...
there's yes. There's this sort of confirmation bias where people looked at a certain view of what they saw things as, and they only want information that is now in accordance to what they already know. Right? So let's say someone is a supporter of a certain soccer team, like let's say Liverpool, for example. That person will only look for information, accept information that promotes his idea about that team being the best. And they'll sort of filter out information that's not in accordance with that. So people that are certain scholars that know a certain amount of information, and that information includes secular education being wrong, they're only going to look at points that prove that. They'll say this one person, he read too much, or he looked too deep, he lost his iman. Right? You'll hear those stories. And it's very, very anecdotal. And because that one story will happen, it might not even be a real story, but the story that's used and spread and everyone hears about it. And that's what gives them this fear about the boogeyman. The West and secular education is boogeyman, and it destroys you. Whereas the truth is, a Muslim isn't afraid of any information. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid of knowledge of any kind.
But it's important that it's deeply rooted in knowledge first, right? Islamic knowledge. So he's not swayed. Because undoubtedly, as we spoke about, there are definitely dangers in certain thoughts, right? But you need to first be grounded in your religion, using the Quran and the Sunnah and everything else, and then you are safe from these threats. But you cannot put your head on the ground. You cannot put your head and think that this is going to go away. And I think that's very important. Shuaib, we have 3 minutes. So can we round this up now? And then I reconnect with you in the next 5 minutes. Are you okay with that?
1 second. There's a very important quote I want to finish off with.
Okay.
Just on this topic about not swaying away from secular education. There's a man called Werner Heisenberg. He's actually known as the father of quantum mechanics. And he said that a sip from the cup of natural science will make you an atheist. But at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting for you.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's just that there's this lack of knowledge and little knowledge that's dangerous. But if someone has to be grounded in their faith and actually understand what's going on in the world, it makes you a much more powerful entity.
So we continue with this in the next, we start off with where Allah Ta'ala says, I've chosen you as the vicegerent on earth. You as the vicegerent, one as the steward to lead mankind. How do we lead mankind if we haven't, what do you call, understood this, or we're not leading mankind in any, whether it's the scientific way or it's the, spiritual way. So we are not leading mankind. But let us continue in the next section, inshallah. So I will end it now and reconnect with you, inshallah.
Perfect. All right. Assalamu alaikum.